Hey guys, so I wanted to make this tutorial because I wanted to show you how to make this seagrass at night scene. It was really easy and something you can do whenever you have some extra ink. I got this ink in the Inkvent calendar from Diamine. It was the 2021 calendar and I loved the ink in there, but there's a whole lot. I really don't use fountain pens a whole lot, but I wanted to figure out a way to kind of use it because I loved the colors. This is Black Ivy that I used in this tutorial, and in it it's a sheening ink. You can see on it how it kind of has a gradient effect, but then you can see the highlights on it. I also use this gold calligraphy ink. Now you don't want to use this in your fountain pens, you want to use a dip pen with it. And you don't have to necessarily use that. You can get a gold felt tip calligraphy type pen. But those things, they don't go very sharp, and you know, you're not going to get the details that I like to use whenever I'm doing artwork. So I use the dip pen for artwork, and this is just something I got from Jet Pens. It's kind of crusty because I use it for art. I don't necessarily use it for writing, and I'm kind of rough on my tools, but there it is. It's a flex tip. And then also I have some bulb suckers, I don't know what else to call them, and two paint brushes, and actually 3 paint brushes, a little palette to hold the ink, some paper towels, and some water there. So for the brushes, I have these 2 flat wide ones and the 1 small one for creating the seagrass. And then for the paper, I just have regular Canson watercolor paper. It's a 7 by 10. So when you cut it in half, you get like a 5 by 7, which is photo size, which is great. I love these little pads of paper. So as you can see, the aspect ratio kind of changed. And my fingers are a little bit dirty, but here we are. We're taping the cut down 5 by 7 sheet of paper. I had some accidents, and you know, you have to be really careful whenever you're taping it down. Ink has a different quality than watercolor or even some of the other paints. It doesn't have the gum in it to thicken it, and so it will bleed through even the tiniest holes. So I'm using Scotch painter's tape, really is all it is, some kind of masking tape. Sometimes I use like washi tape whenever I'm just using watercolors, which is what I primarily work with, not necessarily ink a whole lot. But the washi tape is good for that kind of thing, and especially really good for gouache or you know, acrylics. But for this case, you want to make sure, and you can see how I'm pushing with my fingers on the edge, that you smooth it out so you don't get any kind of little bubbles in there, because you'll see the ink will bleed right through and it'll have that feathering on the edge. So some people like the feathering. It kind of adds a little bit to it. I personally like clean edges just because I like things to be framed nicely. So here it is. We've taped down. I've actually taped down to a clipboard. These are, any kind of flat surface works. As long as it's flat and you don't have to worry about getting paint on it or getting it stained, it's fine. So I'm taking the bigger flat brush. This is a 1-inch brush, and I'm getting the paper wet. Now remember, this is watercolor paper, so there's going to be like a gesso, a gel coating on it. And sometimes, since Canson is kind of a cheap watercolor, the gesso isn't evenly applied. And so I like to go in and kind of just gently scrub it a little bit, just to kind of lift it up and evenly spread that on there so the paint and the ink take evenly to it. If you don't do this, sometimes there'll be like little dry spots where it doesn't take in, and I don't want that. I want a smooth, even wash. So once you have that paperwork, go ahead and put down some extra water on it. That's what's going to make the ink really kind of shine in this one. So I'm taking the Black Ivy, and I already have some on the palette from earlier, but the water interacting with the ink is what gives you that cool sheen colors. You can kind of see on the paper towels there that I've been working with. And so I'm going to put a little bit more, just a little bit, into the palette. And you can use anything. You don't have to use like one of these little palettes. In fact, you could probably use a little glass dish or something like that. Lid on, guys. Make sure you're putting the lid on. I've learned that lesson. And then I'm going to take the next brush. You don't want to use a wet brush. You want to use a dry brush on this one. Make sure the paper's evenly wet. And then when you put it on, you don't want to go back and forth. I scrubbed the paper earlier. You want to do an even stroke across. Make sure you get that top part nice and thick. And then you're just going to kind of bring it down. And I dry it off just because I want that gradient effect, and just work down. You never want to go back up. You want to go straight down. And having some little gaps, I like that. That's going to give you a fun kind of texture of almost like waves and water out on the beach. So on here you can see I put a little bit extra water down on the bottom. That's up to you. I typically don't like to go back over ink or watercolor once I've laid down a wash. That's dangerous territory, and you can get things muddled looking really quick. It's best always never to work up on a wash, always work down. And so if you have a spot that's bare, what you want to do is you want to take that clipboard or whatever your tape to and kind of move it back and forth, move it, tilt it up or down, and get it to go in the direction you want. Now, like I said earlier, ink stains really quickly. It goes into the pores of the paper very quickly, much more quickly than watercolor, much more quickly than some of the other mediums. And so once it's there and it spreads, it kind of freezes there. So you have a small moment of time to get things moving and get that wash to kind of move down, whereas watercolor, you have a little extra time for it to move down. The ink, you have to get it where you want it pretty quickly, and then just don't touch it. Whatever you do, don't touch it. And so here we go. At this point, I'm not touching it. I'm letting it dry. You can see from the light that I'm using that it's shiny, and I think I'm going to go ahead and speed the video up a little bit and get us over to the dry side. Okay, and we're back. So you can see from earlier, whenever it was drying, I wiped down the sides because that'll get on my hand, and I'm very messy. I tend to drag my hand, and so we don't want to do that. We don't want to drag anything across wet across this. It is important that your paper is completely dry whenever you're doing this. I want to make sure that it's completely dry because the calligraphy pen, the dip pen, will scratch the surface very easily if it is wet, and you don't want that to happen. It'll make a big mess. So we're going to go ahead and use this shimmering gold ink. Any calligraphy ink will do. You've got to use something a little bit thicker though, because if it's too thin it won't quite work. And this is a really thick dip ink. In fact, I could probably water this down if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. What I just do is I wipe down the nib quite often because it kind of gets clogged there, and you'll see it get clogged and kind of make a lump. But you're going to work slowly, and I know my friends over in the Reddit calligraphy community, please don't judge me on how I use my dip pen. But this is going up, making strokes. You want to start in the left bottom corner and just slowly make some strokes like seagrass. And so I'm going to kind of gradually move them down as I'm going down to kind of give the effect that it's just a little hill of seagrass over here. And so you want to try not to make it perfectly even. You'll see that I notice, oh no, these are kind of perfectly even, and I want to add some variety into it. So you want to make sure that you're kind of making some tall, making some short, but slowly bringing them down and kind of terminate at that 2/3 point. You want most of the seagrass to cover, using the rule of thirds, just cover about 2/3 of the paper there. And we'll balance it out with some stars later. But you can see how it's thick, and I'm going very slow with my strokes because this nib, it does not want to release this ink. So here we go. You want to make all the seagrass little tufts up at the top where you can go in the same direction. Now you don't want them all to go in the same direction. You want to again add some variety, make it look natural. If you put them all in the same direction, it's not going to look natural. So you want some to go up occasionally and some to go over and not evenly spaced out. So here I am putting the little tufts and the little seeds of seagrass on there. And as you're going, like I said, you want to make sure your paper is perfectly dry. In fact, whenever you're using a dip pen or any kind of calligraphy nib on top of watercolor or paper, you want to make sure that the pen part is last. Now, a lot of people do ink and wash with watercolors, and they'll use a felt tip pen to do the ink first, and that's absolutely fine. But I like to use it last because I worry about scratching the paper. Watercolor paper can sometimes be finicky. Any paper can be finicky, but especially watercolor paper because the surface is created with texture, and you want to make sure that you're not scratching up that surface or making it to where it might draw in the water somewhere where you don't want it to go. So at this point, I'm adding in additional blades, the ones that don't have the seed heads on it, and just stroking the paper and the ink up, not necessarily in the same direction as the big parts of the seagrass, but over to the side and some over to the left just a little bit. Again, you want to add that natural variety to it. And so, there's that mistake. I made a clump, but that's okay. That's what we have our little paintbrush for. So I'll go ahead and take the little paintbrush and I'm going to bring that down. And later on, I was going to make some little strokes with the paintbrush to kind of give it a more of a grassiness down at the bottom. And so this adds weight to your land and kind of gives it that natural thickness at the bottom of those seagrass, sea oats there. And then going ahead and completing with the dip pen. And see how it gets so messy. Like this stuff is really thick. I think you could find some that's probably not quite as thick. I can't remember. Doc Martens, I think, makes some that's a little bit thinner that might be easier to work with. Or worst case scenario, I would take just the little bulb syringe thing and I would drop that into a little container with water and dilute it just a little bit. You don't want to dilute it too much because then it's just kind of a mess and it doesn't stay into the reservoir of the calligraphy nib. But here we go. Now we're taking the brush, and what I'm doing is I'll kind of put in a big stroke to the left and then drag it up to make a natural kind of grass up there. So left to right, and then pull it up and just kind of lift it and give it just kind of a grassiness there. And so you can see how it's making more of a land type feel, like more of a beach feel on there. And adding, I like to make sure that there is no water poking through on the bottom. And now we're adding some stars. The stars are optional. I just like the balance that, that it has with the bottom left corner and the top left corner. Now, something that I noticed whenever I was putting the stars in, and this is kind of one of those little bitty details, you don't want to space the stars out perfectly evenly. That's not how stars are. They kind of clump and bunch together in little constellations. So make them kind of next to each other and then some spread out. And then also, if you're looking at the night sky, you may notice that the bigger, brighter stars are higher in the sky, if that makes sense. And then on the horizon where the sea is reflecting up, you're not going to see as many stars, and those are going to be a little bit more dim. So I put those as smaller as you get further down. And so that's just a little detail to notice whenever you're painting a night scene. Big stars up top and then little bitty stars down at the bottom because the light reflects off the land. So there you go. I'm putting up the ink, putting things away, and now the peeling part. This is the tough part. You want to make sure that you're peeling straight down. Do you see how I fold it over on itself and go really slow? This paper that I'm working with is kind of cheap. And so you want to make sure that you're going very slow with it, because it will peel away really, really easily and just mess up your entire painting. In fact, I worked one earlier, and this is exactly what happened. I got almost all the way through, and then I peeled it, and I was like, it killed the painting. And up in the top right hand corner, there's a little bit, it looks like the ink may have gone under the tape. We'll see. It shouldn't be too bad because I pressed the tape in on it, but it looks like it went up in that crease between the two tapes. And so I'm peeling it up, and here we go. Over, and yep, having issues. So I'm going to start on the other side. If you start to have issues on one side, just go to the other side and then peel from that direction, and it should work out for you. I hope it works out for you. Sometimes I just mess things up completely. So yeah, just a little bit of ink, but I can take care of that pretty easily. And there you go. You have a 5x7 painting. If you frame it, I love how it kind of adds that little whiteness around it. And there we go. This is a sand eraser, and you're actually going to scrub the surface and get rid of like the top layer of the paper. And so what that does is it'll get rid of the ink stain pretty easily. I never use these on the first part of drawing. Always use that at the end, because you don't, you have to be careful with the paper. You don't want to scrub or mess up the surface before you put paint on it. But there at the end, when you're done putting paint on it, it's okay. So here it is. Here's a little lovely scene. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I really love these sheening inks, and I'm going to try to find other ways to use them and make little paintings or something like that, to where I can go ahead and get ready and get these inks used up and get ready for the 2022 Inkvent calendar. If you guys are coming from Reddit fountainpens, thank you. This was fun. I hope you enjoyed this kind of stuff. Here I am signing with my stinky noodlers. I love the smell of that, by the way, because it reminds me of electronic adjustment equipment. I used to work in electronics, so this just kind of brings me back and makes me remember my days whenever I was working out on radars. But here it is. Again, I hope you enjoy it. You can like and add some comments. I'm not really a subscribe kind of person. I don't know if I'm going to do more, but if you like it, leave a comment.